to respond in an effective way to the HIV epidemic, we need to understand and consider structural drivers as part of the long-term programmatic response on HIV. If we were going to move out of an emergency response and have a comprehensive approach, we have to address structural drivers. And I think that's acknowledged now among scientists and amongst policymakers. The problem and the challenges is on implementation. And I think there we are still grappling with issues. So that was the backdrop for this third Structural Drivers Conference. It's the first time this conference was coming to South Africa and to the region, and that is another important moment to note, because what we wanted to do is to ensure that we get enough people from the region participating in this conference. Two things. One is to ensure that there's enough attention given to issues of structural drivers, but for people to give some regional input on diversity of perspectives and experience in terms of implementation. There's a shift in lexicon, there's a shift in terminology from this is the pathway, this is not the pathway, to say rather, how is this mechanism implemented, under what conditions, by whom, who's the target populations, what is your HIV program doing, what's the scope, what's the level of the HIV program, what's the intended consequences, what influence you're trying to achieve, and how you're thinking about the mechanisms to try and achieve that. Post the 2015 AIDS architecture agenda, the discourse is moving towards more broad development goals: poverty alleviation, gender equality, human rights. There's no full clarity, but people are engaging with how to understand these sociologically plausible pathways. I use the term sociologically plausible pathways because we can never have definite pathways, and because they're embedded in social and institutional issues as opposed to being epidemiological in a sense and biomedical. And I think that's part of the kind of tensions that we pick up in conferences like this, the tension between the biomedical and the social practice. The structural drivers have to relate to norms, patterns, institutional practices. And that's where the challenge is. We are all very familiar with the major dominant narrative, which has been a biomedical, particularly in the last 3 years with the microbicides, the IPREX trial, medical male circumcision, Grapisa 004, and the subsequent microbicide trials. And so, and it's been very promising, the results. I mean, that's good that the scientific agenda, the biomedical scientific agenda is advanced. But it begs the question, where's the social? How does it relate to the social narrative? And that's been there, but it's been either as an appendage to biomedical interventions at a very individualized level, which you find in these trials, which is problematic. But saying that a social narrative needs to be linked to structural issues, and I think that was the point of the conference. Medical male circumcision is one really interesting biomedical approach. From an economic perspective, it's very cost effective. It's a once-off procedure. It doesn't require adherence in the sense that all the other trials are battling with. The challenge for us is to say, okay, why doesn't it work in certain communities, and how we can get people to engage with these responses. We are beginning to understand that people cannot operate as autonomous neoliberal agents in a free world. That's a myth. They are governed by structures, be it economic structures, be it normative structures, etc. One of the important things that came out in this conference is economics of HIV/AIDS. We've seen in presentations that we cannot sustain the treatment curve on the epidemic. South Africa is spending about 40% of its health budget on keeping people on treatment. That's not sustainable in the long term. Uh, and that's South Africa. I mean, South Africa is taking on the financing of its own epidemic. For other countries in the region, and that's dire straits, because they depend on international financing. It's an important issue, which means prevention has to be key on the agenda.